Here's a fun little memory I have. I remember my sister one day needed to get something from Walmart, and it was on a Sunday, and we had gone to church. And one thing about our church is that it was an all South Indian Malayali Pentecostal church. All the girls would wear like traditional Indian clothes. It was one of those churches where like your culture and your religion are like this. So every Sunday I would wear a churidar, and my sister would wear a churidar. And I guess for context, my family and I moved to America when I was 4, my sister was 12. So it was like the mid to late 2000s, and it was still America was still very much a place of xenophobia, just like casually. Um, my brother and sister would get made fun of a lot. Uh, Actually, so would I. Um, Pretty much up until like seventh grade when people started becoming more socially conscious. But in that time frame, we would get called fobs. Our food looked gross and smelled gross, and we smelled like curry, and I got called a brownie, and all of the good old stuff. So naturally, my siblings, having come from a place where everyone was brown, to now being singled out not only because you're brown, but also because you are not from this country, um, they had to, I think, just develop a lot of defense mechanisms and coping mechanisms. And unfortunately, at the time, I think those mechanisms really just meant like, okay, you have to find a group you blend into and then stick within that group. So, for my sister, that meant you have to Americanize, you have to assimilate yourself into like being as close to white as possible. So much so that there is indeed a term for it. We call people who do this coconuts because you're brown on the outside and you're white on the inside. I call it a defense mechanism because, you know, you're not going to survive being 14 years old and also being called a fob. You're not going to survive. You have to do something. You need to have some kind of shield to cover yourself with. So if you are in a friend group full of white girls and you're just the token brownie, that, their whiteness is a good shield for you, at least when you're hanging out with them. It's not going to shield you all the way, but it'll make you feel better about it, and it'll make your friends feel like they're better people, unfortunately. In the process of trying to, how do I want to say this? Coconutize yourself. That's terrible. In the process of trying to coconutize yourself, you cannot try to embrace whiteness and also embrace non-whiteness, right? You can't have both exist at the same time. This isn't Schrodinger's cultural box. You have to choose one. If you are trying to embrace whiteness or proximity to whiteness, you then have to hate everything about yourself that is non-white. So that includes your culture, your skin, your family, your ancestry, sometimes your language. And I think this is, I want to say subconsciously, the mindset that both my siblings had when we first moved here. So back to the story. My sister needed to get something from Walmart. It's a Sunday. We're both wearing, Indian clothes. And my dad suggests going to Walmart like right after church and then going back home. And my sister makes kind of a big deal about it because she doesn't want to go into Walmart with her churidar on. And I think I was young enough at that time where I was still a little bit, I don't know if naive is the right word, maybe oblivious, maybe idealistic, because to me, churidars were beautiful. And if I thought it was beautiful, I wanted everybody else to see it and then also tell me that they thought it was beautiful. So I thought she was crazy. I was like, your churidar is so nice. Like, who cares what old white people at Walmart say about it? And there's truth in that. Like, really, who cares? You're not ever going to see them again. But I think at that point in my sister's head, I think it was easier to keep your efforts in trying to be white in one box and then who you actually are in another box. And going to Walmart with a churidar on would be like if someone took the two boxes and emptied them out all over the floor. And so now I understand why she had such a problem with it. That was a line that other racist people had taught her to not cross. And it's unfortunate, but it's how she lived for, at that point, what, 3 of her adolescent years, which are already terrible. But she trained herself to be like that. She wanted to straighten her hair. She wanted to thin her eyebrows as much as possible. Um, it was, and even on my brother's side, like, there was some coconutification going on. And it's interesting for me because I grew up at a transition period. I think I grew up during a very noticeable culture shift where when I was really young, I remember those things. Like, I remember my brother and sister telling me not to wear certain things and, like, make sure you leave the house when Amma is cooking chicken curry, otherwise your clothes will smell like chicken curry and you'll get made fun of. I did get made fun of. Um, but I remember learning all of this when I was like really young. It was like ancient rules being passed down from my siblings who have already had to face the brunt of it. And I was like, okay, when I get a little bit older and I'm gonna start doing my eyebrows. I remember my sister looking at my eyebrows and saying, you're gonna have a really tough time because your eyebrows are really thick. And at the time, really thin eyebrows were in. And she was like, yeah, you're gonna have to spend a lot of time doing your eyebrows. And she said something similar about my leg hair. And you might think, wow, that's a really shitty thing for an older sibling to say. But I think she was legitimately just trying to warn me because those were things that she had to learn the hard way, which is kids bullying her for it. But I remember her, basically telling me all these tips and trying to prepare myself. And I remember like thinking of, um, like basically like seventh, eighth grade, I'm gonna have to do all these things to basically pretend that I was as close to white as possible. And Then I got to seventh grade, and all of a sudden, it's like, oh, thick eyebrows are in style now. Oh, people are somewhat, some people care whether you call them, racist, and people are learning about what microaggressions are. And by people, I mean white people. White people are learning about what microaggressions are. And, gay marriage got legalized. And so it kind of opened the floodgates for what seemed to be a very, like, social, cultural change for progress. And so, at least outwardly, my thick eyebrows weren't a problem anymore. Me getting darker over the summer wasn't as much of a concern. Me bringing Indian food for lunch was not seen as something gross or bad. If anything, it was bad to say that it looked gross. I was well within my right to, be upset if anyone had said something, and I would have the support of my peers. That was not something that really existed earlier than that. And that's not to say like it was a social utopia. I mean, I think if anything, what we've learned in the past few years is that a lot of that social change was quite shallow, but it was a change. I wasn't getting called a fob to my face, which is good. But I do have to give my family grace for surviving what they did go through. When it, oh, my air conditioner just came on. Can't wait to see what my energy bill is. But there, I have to give them some grace. Like, yeah, you're not gonna be walking through a protest in City Hall anytime soon, but you got called some pretty terrible things to your face. You've been disrespected to your face multiple times growing up in the middle of nowhere in Connecticut. You you had to go through that. You had to go through that and go through the rest of the world basically training you to hate yourself because you weren't white, because you were too hairy, because you were too dark. And you're still here. You came out on the other side. Yeah, I think I do want to give them a bit of grace. Because if some white kid started coming up to me and making fun of my accent because I didn't grow up here, I would make some mistakes. I would make some violent mistakes. I would make some mistakes that might put me on the 9 o'clock news. When I'm 14? Hello? Of course. I'm already emotionally unstable. One white kid mocking my accent would probably be enough. I don't know if any of that made sense. I'm hoping that this is somewhat relatable to someone. Um, if I said anything really wrong or really right, obviously, please let me know. Um, please let me know in a comprehensive way. The internet can be a weird place when you open up for critique, but it's 11 p.m. I gotta go to bed. Um, but yeah, but yeah, I don't know. There's probably a lot of things that I skipped over and nuances, but that is just something I was thinking about today.